Hi there, welcome to the Fierce Factor podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Lindholm. And I think it's time for us women to shift the conversation in business and step into our feminine leadership to do the most iconic work the aesthetic industry has ever seen. Each week, I'll be bringing a powerful dose of strategy, sarcasm, solutions, and sass that will rev up your creativity and ignite your brilliance as you link arms with me along our shared path of personal and professional growth in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hello, leader. Welcome back to the Fierce Factor podcast. I am your host, Kaylee Lindholm, and you are tuning in to episode 70. Today, we are going to talk about a very spicy topic. When I say spicy, I mean slightly controversial because there are a lot of differing opinions about strategies for growing demand for business, one of them being a very familiar aspect of booking clients, the wait list. Ba-dum-bum. I picked this topic for today's episode because I seem to have had several conversations around the nuances of waitlisting over the past few months, really all over the board. Essentially, providers with no wait list feel underbooked, like they must be leaving money on the table because they don't have pent-up demand for their services. Yet, on the other hand, practices who have long wait lists feel like they could be risking patient bookings or really increasing their chances for cancellations if consumers become fed up with waiting and opt to go get treated elsewhere. So today I want to talk about the aesthetic wait list and how along this agenda, there really is a thin line between genius and insanity. It's a line I call the sweet spot. And in order to inhabit this idyllic space, we really need to explore what is the purpose of a waitlist anyway, what makes a waitlist work well, and at what point does a waitlist become unfavorable and basically backfire on us. So I personally use the waitlist strategy in my business, also the priority list, also the limited supply, and also the application process. All of these can favorably impact buying psychology, and I believe when used strategically can subsequently stimulate conversation around your brand. But there is a tipping point. So a little story about one of what I would consider one of the most special periods of my life, that being my 5th year of college, pre-husband, pre-kids, and pre-big girl job. I worked at a little breakfast joint on the water in Long Beach, California called Schooner Later. And Schooner Later still exists, and most folks in SoCal know of this little gem. It's basically a ma and pop breakfast shop, and it is nestled in the bay, literally hanging over the boat docks. And they're known for their greasy breakfast food and outdoor bar. Hence the name Schooner, which is a double entendre for the double-masted sailboat and also a 32-ounce double-barreled stemmed beer glass. This job taught me so many valuable lessons, you guys. One of them being how to open a champagne bottle like a pro. To this day, I would challenge anyone to a champagne bottle cork pop-off. Seriously, is that weird? Anyway, Schooner Later used to get these really long waits. And most of the time this was okay because customers could grab a mimosa or Bloody Mary and sit on the benches overlooking the water. They played music. The weather is always perfect. You know, it's one of those amazing places just to chill. Nobody was in a rush. But every so often we'd get up to a 1.5 to 2 hour-ish long wait, and some out-of-towner hangry folks would come in and quite frankly just wouldn't really get the vibe. They'd put their name in and then they'd leave and drive around to find a spot, maybe land at a Mimi's Cafe. And sure enough, 2 hours later, let's say when they had originally arrived at breakfast time and it was now lunch, get it? Our hostess would call their name and it would be crickets. She'd call them again and nothing. She'd call the next name on the list, same thing, nothing, right? All these folks had left. So without fail, we'd basically lose half the wait list and wind up with a restaurant patio full of empty tables for the last hour of business. Now, fortunately, most of the time we had seasoned hostesses who knew the strats. So even if the quote unquote algorithm said, you know, the wait would be 2 hours, you'd really quote 1 hour to the customer. And most of the time they'd get tipsy and not care if it ended up being longer, but it would prevent impatient patrons from jumping ship before they they even got to get settled into a schooner beer. So the second life-changing lesson I learned working at this joint was mastering a waitlist sweet spot. And this lesson seems to be the gift that keeps on giving, as I have humbly learned to strategically guide implementation of consumer demand strategies over and over again across industries. Just saying. So let's talk about the wait list. By definition, it's a list of people who have asked for something which cannot be given to them immediately and who must therefore wait until it's available. Fashion brands such as Louis Vuitton, automotive brands such as Tesla, and technology brands such as Apple have generated waitlists of several 100,000 customers and cash flows of several $1 billion for its waitlisted products. So I can totally understand why aesthetic service providers take keen interest to this method for generating pent-up demand. It works. But like I mentioned, there can be a downside to a drawn-out waitlist. A client recently asked me, what's the deal with injectors announcing a long wait list? So for example, not accepting new patients or booked until January of 2023. Now there's a limited number of spaces on an IG profile. So if someone is going to display this information, you better believe that they subscribe to this or that they have seen success by showcasing their busyness as in high demand. But before you jump in and declare that you aren't booking for months, you need to ask yourself the following questions. Number one, does this level of inaccessibility fit my brand or actually repel my ideal customer? Will I be perceived as in demand or just simply stuck up or unapproachable? And then number two, does this actually fit my business model? Do I have an alternative option for patients, or are they being forced into this waiting period without another pathway for having their needs met? So with that being said, there's really a technique for effectively using waitlist strategy. And so I wanted to spend the lion's share of our time together today talking about when a waitlist works and how to intentionally and strategically use one in your business. Okay. So there are a few scenarios where a waitlist really does work. Number one, when there's a pent-up demand that is growing, not fading. So if you're experiencing cancellations, you may be pushing the boundaries of a healthy waitlist period, okay? We want to make sure we're seeing that demand continue to grow and not to start to see attrition or fall off at the back end. Okay. Number two, when a waitlist works is when it is a reasonable timeline. So what's reasonable will depend on the products or services at play. So for example, a patient waiting for a refill on a retail product will be much more likely to seek an alternative than a facelift candidate. But where I tend to see this get a little fickle is with injectables, lasers, and now more than ever fillers. And while this isn't widely researched, my anecdotal experience is that a 4 to 6 week timeline is about the time period where a patient will begin getting tired of looking at themselves with the same problem that they have already made a decision to invest in solving and will start to explore alternatives. Okay. Number three, when a waitlist works is really when it is used strategically as a branding positioning tactic. So one example of this would be a new business that is still growing their clientele. So let me give an example. I remember when my esthetician was telling me the story that when she opened up her business, she remembers having a handful of clients, like a small handful, most of them her family members, and just wide open books. And she was so hungry to grow her business. And one day a woman walked in and asked if she could schedule an appointment for the next day. And she had trained her staff to tell the woman, "We are fully booked, but when would be an ideal time for you to come in? Let me see if I can move one of our regular clients, since we'll really want to make sure that we have some extra time for you for a comprehensive skincare consultation during your first visit." And so they're really using that technique that oh gosh, we're fully booked, but let me squeeze you in, so that client's sort of feeling like it's my first time and I feel special, but not, oh, we're wide open. When would you like to come in? Let's book the first available. Okay. So those are really three occasions where I see, that this wait list is an effective strategy. So when there's pent-up demand, that is growing, not fading. Number 2, your wait list is a reasonable timeline. And number 3, it's used strategically as a brand positioning tactic. Okay. So now let's explore 5 tips for how to powerfully implement a wait list in your business. If you have a pen and paper, this is the time where you may want to write these down. Okay. So number 1 would be to build a long-term care plan. So listen, if you're in peak demand, or quite frankly, even if you're not yet, this can be a beautiful strategy for building predictability in your revenue cycle. And I touch on this back in episode 39 called 2021 Aesthetic Trends, Creating Momentum for Our Clients. And if you haven't checked out that episode, be sure to go back and save that for after you finish this episode. When you create a habit of discussing a 6-month to a 1-year care plan with patients, they will know what to expect, meaning you can set the expectations up front for what it's going to really take to help them achieve their desired outcomes. You can really optimize the results you're able to achieve because they're committing to a program versus a treatment, and you can help them plan their appointments ahead of time. So for example, you might say something like, my schedule typically books about 3 months out. So we'll get your appointments on the calendar now to make sure we optimize your timeline in alignment with this plan, right? So that you're getting your treatments in on time, okay? The second sort of tip would be to use your waitlist as a gateway to engineer the celebrity of your team members, aka other providers. So this really parlays into one of the core principles I've been discussing over the past few weeks related to credentialing your team to allow yourself the ability to step into your role as a CEO. So whether you're booked or not, this could be a strategy to implement to really subtly encourage your patients to seek comfort and safety with your well-credentialed team who will provide treatment in line with your proprietary method or technique. Okay. So the third strategy for implementing this waitlist would be to build short-term demand as a new or growing business. So I used the example of my esthetician, right? This can be an effective strategy right off the bat. During the checkout process, we always advise our clients to provide the 2 next available appointments rather than this open-ended question of when would you like to come in, right? So we're really showing that patient that we're running a tight schedule. We are in high demand. Here are the next 2 appointments, or here are some recommended appointment times that are available to you. Usually when somebody has an option of this or that, they'll pick this or that, Otherwise, if you leave it open-ended, that's where you're sort of opening yourself up to that. Well, let me go check my kid's calendar at home and I'll give you a call or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then that's just more onus on the practice to have to follow up and start this sort of like picky sales process, right? So using it to build short-term demand as a newer growing business by really helping them get scheduled and getting them on your calendar within a limited supply time frame right off the bat. Okay. The fourth tip would be as a perk for VIP members. So you could essentially reverse engineer the waitlist in this scenario. For example, think of the Disney Fast Pass. So you basically wait in god-awful lines at Disneyland unless you invest in a higher level of service. So you may have a VIP membership and want to include one of those benefits or the perks of that membership to be access to appointments during reserved windows of time that are allocated for VIPs. Okay, so again, it's kind of dependent on your schedule, the schedule you want to work, the time frame. Maybe it's your Saturday morning appointments are just for VIPs. Maybe it's, something you don't technically market it, but, there's sort of this tacit understanding with your team that the people on the VIP list get special access. And so maybe they pay into that, for that special perk. Okay. And then tip number 5 would be as a strategic part of the relationship marketing process to increase education. And really this is for greater likelihood of upsells, cross-sells, and referrals. So this might look like using your waitlist period strategically to send educational videos, emails, or patient testimonials to patients who are interested in those next level procedures. So you're staying front of mind, you're showing some love, you're earning credibility, and you're really leveraging a waitlist period to solidify the treatment plan. By the way, this works especially well with a long-term care plan. So for example, you might tell the patient, well, you're getting your microneedling treatment done. We could do your filler the same day to optimize downtime and bruising in one session. And so you're sort of getting on this long-term care plan with them and they're like They know what's coming over the next 3, 6, 9 months. You're starting to get those appointments booked. And then between these appointments, you're really marketing to them to get them really comfortable with making that higher level investment of services with you. Also, during that time period, you're really staying front of mind, so they're more likely to be talking to their friends about their appointments coming up, etc., referring other people, all of the things. Okay. All right. So here's the thing, leaders. I'll be real with you. Someone who is advertising their books being full for 6 months is playing a risky game. I told you this would get spicy because the other side to the coin is the perception of a brand that is not well staffed, not well organized, and is not prepared for growth. A business that is not set up to support clients at the time of their needs could appear to be more disorganized than in demand. Okay. Now, we're not talking about a Tesla here, right? We're talking about patients who are getting on a program or a plan and they have been looking in the mirror and feeling, they're every single day waiting for this treatment and there are other options. Okay. It's not like, oh, I'll not get that Tesla, I'll go to another Tesla, right? We're talking about apples to oranges. So I want you to really think about this and consider, what is your strategy? And just because someone else is doing this in their business doesn't mean it's successful for them. Just because they're advertising, it doesn't mean they're not getting 3 cancellations a day, you guys. Okay. So what the heck do you do if your wait list has gotten out of hand, or if you're starting to see the signs that you're getting booked out further and further, right? How do you anticipate and take action before it's too late? So you start looking at your most valuable buyers and you get really focused on creating boundaries around your time and service delivery for them. Okay. So you're essentially not mixing in your, let's call them lower quality, less desirable, right, clients into the mix that are pushing your more high desirable clients back. Okay. So you're really focusing on, and ultimately as a business strategy, this is something we teach, which is knowing who that most valuable buyer is and really focusing your marketing, your delivery of service, your time, the experiences that you create within your practice, boundaries around protecting that client. Okay. And then B, it may be time to start thinking about your scale strategy, okay? The aesthetic industry, you guys, generated over $9 billion in revenue last year during a pandemic. I don't know if you're as mind blown as I am. And non-surgical procedures accounted for a whopping $3 billion, okay? So we're talking about 2.6 million neurotoxin procedures and 1.3 million dermal filler procedures. You guys, aesthetic injectables is booming and showing no sign of slowing. And so what does that mean? If you're at this point where you're even like your ears are perking up about this whole waitlist conversation, let's face it, demand is surging, right? But more and more providers are jumping into the injectable game. And so maybe you were the only show in town for a while, and not to say you're not the absolute best in your market. You very well could be and most likely are, but it doesn't mean that that's evident to the consumer. Okay. And so there's really an opportunity here to, especially if you're established and you're an expert at your craft, to really expand your established, distinct brand and stand out in the marketplace. I mean, the challenge is really that great injectors are in high demand, but it's increasingly difficult to service that demand at scale, which is why these wait lists continue to grow and grow and grow. And then it becomes sort of a dysfunctional business strategy. Okay. And if you are at this point and you're thinking that this is something that you really should consider or address, or you are at a point where you want to prepare for and anticipate the demand that's coming in next year, I'd really like to invite you to apply to join a powerful audio series and training program that I'll be launching this fall. It's called Confidence to Scale, and this is a limited edition podcast series. It's a private podcast, so you actually apply. There is a process. There will be a small fee for this, but this is me putting my absolute best work together. This is taking the concepts that you're hearing at high level over the past few weeks about this inflection point, really taking a deep dive into this and putting a blueprint together to develop a step-by-step process for getting focused on your best work, and then putting those systems in place to build scalability in your business, meaning teaching you how to make more money without exerting more of your time or precious energy, instead focusing that time on pleasure and fun. Okay. So if this sounds like something interesting to you, you can head over to klcconsultants.com/scale and just register yourself for the priority list. We will be opening up registration in the next 2 weeks, and our priority list will be the first to get access to the details and get access to reservation for the limited space masterclass that I'll be hosting live at the end of this program. Alrighty, leader. I hope this was helpful for you. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Fierce Factor. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure you subscribe so you can automatically get new shows every week. I'd also love it if you left us a review. And come join the conversation online. If you're an aesthetic industry owner, operator, or leader, please join my free Facebook group, The Tribe of Fierce Aesthetic Leaders, a community of ambitious, purpose-driven professionals who collaborate and share best practices for growth in business and life. I'm honored you tuned in.